the Pan-African Biennale, the intent is to create an institution that allows then local architects to, from the different geographical areas within the continent, to share their work, to have the chance to presenting and sharing their voice, and hopefully also creating the dialogue with international communities worldwide. So the intent is also to create bridges and communication with the broader, if you want to, African community in the diaspora and within the continent, but also with all those nations that have been one way or another, they intersect their own history with the African continent, right? So this was very, very important, and I think that as a dream, so the Pan-African institution will be transformed into an institution. In fact, so this first edition will be in Nairobi, but we're hoping to making this going around different nations, so to keep this very strong Pan-African intent, and allowing then to move the discourse of architecture by also allowing to regain not only the control of the narrative, but also helping to help the discussion of each one of these geographical areas within the continent, right? So hopefully this will be the ground break of this. I think fragility is now becoming, unfortunately, a much more common term than used to be before, right? We have like the world that is more exposed to natural disaster, climate change, but also like conflicts in different entities on different levels, political instability, if you want to, economical fragility. So the fragility for me is the broader term that describe situations that are not ideal, if you want to. But also, and this is why the title of the Biennale itself, From Fragility to Resilience, because wherever there is the extreme fragility of a community, there is also the extreme resilience of it. In fact, we have observed in a lot of contexts where, for example, humanitarian aid doesn't come, or there is a natural disaster, or there is some difficulty in the neighborhood, how much the community comes stronger together, are more inclined to share, are more inclined to kind of take ownership over their spaces. So in this particular case, in the case of the African continent, has always been described through the lens of fragility, right? From the slave trade to the exploitation, to governments that are not stable, to migration, and so and so. But as everything is just like a chapter of a bigger book, right? So for me, it's just like, yeah, that happened, and we all acknowledge that, but there is much more. There is history, there is resilience, there is community development, there are cities that are booming, there's an economy that they're booming too in a lot of places. So this duality between the two terms is extremely important. So for me, fragility is just the starting point to kind of like dismiss the idea that it's just fragile. To like a slightly step backward and to reconnect a second to the discourse that I briefly share, right? Because I think one of the things also that I'm trying to do through this Biennale is bringing up the discourse around sustainability, right? And I think that even the concept per se of sustainability has been extremely dictated by the global north, right? So if we use that metric, then a lot of other things then ended up not being sustainable. So, local traditions, local materials, earth construction, and so on, all those tropical design, they kind of don't match the expectation of what is sustainability according to the global standard. And that, I think, also it remove a bit of the impact of psychological aspect of what sustainability is, because you can stay in a closed glazed building where you have the control of the air and everything, and then you cannot open a window, you cannot access to a balcony, and so that it's kind of like a contradiction about per se of what sustainability is, right? So when we're talking about designing, I think is complicated, but it's also a matter of reframing this narrative about vernacularism as an important thing as much as contemporary design. Because if you look at that in perspective, people love to go in the Swiss Alps and being in a chalet that has been done with the stone roof and the stone walls, and that is is seen as a very fascinating things. But yet, if I'm telling you, hey, we build with earth, or we build with bamboo, or we use a bit more of the nut, it's like, no, that is not the right approach of design, right? So also reframing this, it means taking ownership of that. And I think that is impacting also, well, how community build, what is considering that. And when there was the exhibition at MoMA, Architecture Without Architects, I think, that per se showcased that, we don't really need architects for that. And I think it's also, there is a big level of arrogance to things that as architects, we can control the whole built environment of the world, which is like ridiculous. We can help into guiding certain things, but construction and building is a human need, and that is behind the skills of an architect per se, right? I think in our sense is more to navigate between policies making now, institutions, design, and trying to also guiding a bit, considering the challenges that we have in terms of climate change, in terms of urban sprawl, slum upgrades, and how the city develop. I think that is where I think architects have a bit of a key impact. But I base it on the UNESCO Declaration of Cultural Diversity, right, and cultural identity. We simply share, like, to summarize a bit, that cultural diversity, as much as biodiversity, should be preserved for the benefit of present and future generation. Which this, for me, is a bit of the ground of the approach, right? Because if we started to, I don't think no one traveled with the intent to go to New Delhi and then be in Rome and then be in New York and then be in Lagos and see the same things, right? So this idea is that architecture has always been a bit of a representation of the communities that live the spaces. And in the moment where that is taken away because of the use of technology, and technology is actually supposed to help us to have a better life, not destroy our roots and diversity, right? Because I think this is what is the beauty of our world, right? The food, the languages, the clothes that we wear, the way that we speak, the music that we listen, and of course, architecture. But I feel like we totally ended up underestimate the value of certain things because for us it's so obvious, but yet we spend 83% of our lives within buildings, but then we don't give much importance to that, right? In global scale. So when I'm talking about the process of decolonization, it's not just about rewriting how the history has been portrayed, dig out what has been hidden, but it also means embracing local technology, because people have lived for centuries of years. If they're telling you that maybe you need to have cross ventilation and then you started to put glazed windows that you cannot open, well, then there is a problem in there, right? So there's sort of a duality between indigenous community and architects are extremely important, right? Which open, in terms of decolonization, I think there is like an important factor, which is reframing how the academic curriculums are being shared to the students. Because then again, if we give more importance to study Miss Van der Rohe and I don't know, and Le Corbusier, rather than, I don't know, Minette de Silva or Jeffrey Bauer, then there is a problem in narration, right? So then you ended up having a generation of architects that maybe are working in Morocco, or they're working in Sri Lanka, or they're working in Angola, and then thinking about, okay, let me do the models that the Miss Van der Rohe has. Yeah, but Miss Van der Rohe was no more working in Angola, was not working in Sri Lanka. So I think also the decolonization terms is a duality of things, right? How we build, how we teach, how we understand. You need to leave the ego at home, right, for a moment, and trying to go a bit bottom up in that sense. Speaking with people. I mean, there's also like a lot of all the word is made for a good portion about oral histories and transmission and dialogue, right? So in a moment where you start to work with the community, but even by simple engaging with them in local activities, basic activity, right? Like, I'm going to to the oldest coffee place in the city and having a chat. They tell you stories, and you know, and then from that, obviously they change, but they start to give you an understanding of things. And you know, you can't build something that people feel the sense of belonging because you don't understand what has been missing, right? And I think that is a bit of a fundamental thing. And you know, memory plays a role as much as like it's complicated then to understanding how to reinterpret that memory in something that, you know, then is not too disconnected, but it is also disconnected. So you wanted to take, you know, a new stand on something that we used to be, because, you know, we move forward in a sense, right? So it's the bridging between, you know, memory, but also looking forward, but also sense of belonging. And it's very complicated, and you can't do that top down. So, you know, if you come and you just build it up, most likely people will reject the project, will find hostility, will not engage with that. So, I mean, at least that's what I'm trying to do. And what I find it was successful. And it doesn't matter if it's, you know, in a refugee camp, or in a slum upgrade, or in a neighborhood that is affected by lack of sort of governance and government presence, right? So I think they have a commonality of feeling neglected for an extent. I think like to avoid to make this become an elite, you need to start to engage people that are being excluded by the elite, which means starting to create a just presence. So in a sense that, you know, the exhibition spaces are equal in dimension, for example, or that, you know, each nation has the same you know, basic budget to start, but also in a way that, you know, what we're trying to do is, again, is building this organization of the Pan-African Biennale, that it become an institution in creating space for architecture within the continent. So we hope that with this first edition, we know we're going to try to do things in Nairobi, and not everything may come right. But the idea is, you know, to provide a voice to the unvoiced, to all those people that maybe do great work, but they haven't been great in having access to a platform, or they haven't had the chance to, you know, to share their ideas and thoughts, or that they felt excluded. Because I mean, the reality is that nowadays, thinking about African architecture, you probably extinguish the names after, you know, 5 or 6. And I think that this is just like an incredible neglection, considering that is one of the biggest continent with the biggest population that is growing, right? So I think that just by doing the act in that sense of making a presence is already something, but also considering that the main pavilion would only be for the African presence. You know, that already is I believe a sort of differentiation between the other, like the Biennale of Venice. We're not intended to recopy the model at all. And you know, and there's no I think that the word expected to be engaged in terms of pavilion presence, why we in this first edition especially will give the pavilions presence to the African nations, but then we will have participation from other parts of the world, but not as a world entities, but more like as a architecture offices that do a great work, and you know, and institutions that can have conversations. So the elitist part of it is probably getting as open as possible to everyone, including students, including creating workshops, you know, having the possibility not only to assist, but also to engage in discussions that have been probably excluded. So the intention is, one, I don't want to reward the neutrality in this discourse. So, you know, if you're planning to just do something cute for photos, hop, and then go to the vernissage and say that you've been in that, that's not the person in the architecture office that I'm trying to incorporate with that, which that per se already will you know, will create a differentiation, because the people that actually do the work in the field, they're not the one that have time to go and take in the photos and do the cute thing, right? So they have work to do and presenting. So hopefully that will also help platforms and media presence internationally to understand that is impossible to just think that two, three individuals share the voices of a whole continent and then narrate this narrative. It doesn't make any sense. I can tell you one of the things that I don't believe is functional in that sense is the fact that there are this sort of handbook that impose design guidelines all over the world, from India all the way to Senegal and South Africa, or in all the global South, trying to standardize the approach to emergency shelter by totally, or at least for a good extent, removing the different communities, right? And here's where I think the architect should be more involved. Like a lot of these guidelines, a lot of these projects that actually don't involve local architects in the discourse. They actually don't have a discussion about how to do that. I think that is already an indicator of a problematic situation. And again, the fact that a lot of these solutions are considered temporary, and they should be temporary, but the reality of the field is then that they ended up being like a very long lasting, if not in some cases almost permanent solutions, right? So that is why there is an urgency to actually have debates and discourse in that. So how to be sure that maybe we can rehave this conversation in a couple of decades and see if I find some solutions, but I think it's very challenging, yeah. Understanding of it, and I don't have the audacity to believe to be totally right in this, but I think that there are few problems. One is the broader architectural faculties around the continent. They're very, very young, most of them, compared to the rest of the world, right? If you want to. And also a lot of them, they are like run through like a sort of foreigner models, ex-colony models, either British system or French system, right? And that is already something that I would say that is challenging, and again I would say that also that it comes with probably lack of academics around the continent broadly that can help shaping a bit of narrative, which I think is kind of like a global South, if we want to. Maybe in Africa is a bit deeper, in sub-Saharan Africa a bit more. But I think that is one of the problems. I think having the institutions, they're still grappling to understanding what is the right curriculum to develop or how to develop that. Architecture associations within the continent broadly, they're still, for an extent, fragile. So they're working, there are like some that do better than others. So it's still a very big process of development and setting the ground, which I think, on the other hand, it's an incredible opportunity to have a different direction to what happened in the rest of the world, right? So there are a lot of individuals that, especially young architects and young academics, that they're trying to reframe the curriculum, which then on the longer run will train different architects, will then have a stronger voice within the continent, right? So I think this is a process that will take decades to be affirmed, and it will change the global the global discourse within the continent. I think slowly bringing a bit of equal presence, because I think now I can fairly say the majority of the bigger commissions within the continent, for example, are being given to foreign architecture offices. And what is due to that, I think, are multiple things, which can be from better skill to better access to a name. A lot of governments, there's still this this Archistar effect, if you want to, right? The Kugram of Bilbao effect. But I think that is one of the things. On the other hand, though, I believe that is also due to the not properly fair work that a lot of institutions abroad and magazines abroad, they have been given to the continent, right? Because obviously once you start to represent much more the Western world then the global south, and then within the global south, you tend to represent even less Africa, and then with Africa, less more the sub-Saharan Africa, then it become a problem because then even the architects that have like a voice, they don't get the same sort of advertisement that other architects, so they seems they almost do not exist. So that I think is a broader problem of narration. I would say it's a sort of butterfly effect. I think if you're just waiting and you're waiting to respond to something that is happening, that's not right. That's not great. You don't, it's always the discourse about like, natural disaster. Are you just waiting for that to happen to see then how you're going to respond, or you're going to be prepared to then having all the actions in places if it's happening or not? So I think that there is a number of African cities and African entities that they need to be supported in shaping what they are, because there are historical heritage cities, there are cities that are framed within a different sort of environment, but also new city growing. There are like rural entities growing. So, and this is actually what is going to happen in this Biennale. The Biennale will have a portion entirely dedicated to African futures, cities focus. So how will it look the city of tomorrow in Africa? Because I think Africa offers the possibility of reshaping certain identities, like how we're going to create cities that are more responsive to climate disaster, to technology, to crisis, but it also like a push up towards a more equitable future, more sustainable future, more access to city needs. So I think this duality is important. But I think Africa shows, I would say also like probably as the whole broader global South, that we are in movement. It's not like a static situation as it could be like in Europe, right? Things that keep moving, population keep changing, youth keep growing. So I think having this vision that is not 10 years ahead, but is like 100 years ahead, with steps, and having discussion about policy making, having discussion about urban planning, rural areas. I think like one thing that if I can, that I quote, that is my personal disagreement, is we tend to say like, well, the future is the creation of cities. I don't want that. I want you to have like, as much as cities are growing, one of the challenges is the fact that people leave rural areas to go to the cities, but they don't leave, like a lot of people don't leave rural areas because they hate the rural areas. They leave rural areas because the services are not decentralized. You don't have access to good education, to good healthcare, to good infrastructure. So, do you really want to move everyone to cities and then have mega cities that for an extent they can become unlivable, or maybe decentralize a bit the system and supporting that? I think that is a big question to have, right? I feel like a lot of architects, they kind of like giving up on the rural development, which I think actually is a key important factor of how actually cities function though.